The message arrived just after sunrise while I was making coffee before work. My wife Emily had left the previous evening, saying she needed a week away to clear her mind and spend time traveling. I didn't question it because, after 8 years of marriage, I believed trust was more valuable than suspicion. Then my phone buzzed. "I'm in Paris. I'll be back in a week." Attached was a smiling selfie in front of a famous landmark. I stared at the screen for several seconds before calmly typing my reply. "Have fun with Mike. Your divorce papers will be waiting for you." I pressed send, locked my phone, and took a slow sip of my coffee. Less than a minute later, my phone started ringing. Emily called once, then twice, then 5 more times. I ignored every call. A flood of desperate messages followed, each one more frantic than the last. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing answers. I had already made my decision. I simply wanted peace after months of questions that never seemed to have honest answers. Emily's panic didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm I felt. Months earlier, I would have answered immediately, desperate to hear an explanation. But too many small things had changed over the previous year. Weekend plans suddenly became business meetings. Phone calls were taken in another room. Messages disappeared the moment I walked into the room. Every time I asked if something was wrong, Emily smiled and told me I was imagining things. I wanted to believe her because that's what people do when they love someone. They hold on to hope long after doubt has appeared. But eventually, hope without honesty becomes denial. I hadn't reached my decision because of one message from Paris. I reached it after months of watching trust slowly disappear. The name Mike wasn't chosen randomly. It was a name that had quietly appeared in conversations more often than Emily realized. When I included it in my message, her immediate panic told me everything I needed to know. For the next several hours, my phone never stopped vibrating. Emily left emotional voicemails insisting I had misunderstood everything. She begged me to answer just once so she could explain. I listened to none of them. Instead, I focused on organizing my thoughts and preparing for the conversation I knew would eventually happen. Late that afternoon, another call came. This time it wasn't Emily. It was her mother, Linda. I answered because Linda had always treated me with kindness and deserved respect. Her voice was calm but concerned. "Please tell me what's happening," she said. "Emily has been crying all day. She says you won't answer her." I took a deep breath before responding. "Linda, this didn't begin today. Today is simply the day I stopped pretending everything was fine." There was a long silence before she quietly replied, "I think there's more to this than Emily has told me." That sentence alone told me she already suspected the story wasn't complete. Linda asked if she could come by that evening, and I agreed. When she arrived, I didn't hand her accusations or angry messages. Instead, I explained how our marriage had slowly changed over the past year. I described the growing distance, the broken promises, and the conversations that always ended with me being told I was overreacting. I wasn't trying to convince her that Emily was a terrible person. I simply wanted someone to understand why I had finally reached my limit. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finished, she quietly admitted that Emily had become distant with her family as well and often avoided answering simple questions about her life. "I wish she had talked to someone before it reached this point," Linda whispered. I nodded. "So do I." For the first time in months, I felt like someone understood that this wasn't about Paris. It was about the choices that had slowly pulled our marriage apart long before that plane ever took off. The next morning, Emily called again, but this time I answered. She was crying before I even said hello. "Please, just let me explain," she begged. I calmly replied, "I've spent months listening to explanations. Today I want honesty." There was a long silence before she admitted she had hidden parts of the truth because she was afraid of the consequences. She insisted the trip wasn't what I thought it was, but I reminded her that the issue wasn't only Paris. It was every small decision that slowly destroyed the trust between us. I asked her one simple question. "If I hadn't sent that message mentioning Mike, would you have told me everything when you came home?" She couldn't answer. That silence spoke louder than anything else she could have said. At that moment, I realized our marriage hadn't been broken by one vacation. It had been weakened by countless moments where honesty was replaced with excuses. A few days later, Emily returned home earlier than planned. She walked through the front door carrying her suitcase, looking nothing like the smiling woman from the photo she had sent from Paris. We sat across from each other at the dining table, and for the first time in a long while, neither of us tried to win the conversation. Emily admitted that she had taken my patience for granted. She believed I would always forgive her, no matter how many times my concerns were dismissed. I also acknowledged my own mistakes. There were times when I buried myself in work and failed to notice how disconnected we had become. But I explained that difficult seasons in a marriage should lead to honest conversations, not hidden lives. We both realized that avoiding uncomfortable truths had only made the situation far worse than it ever needed to become. The following weeks were filled with difficult decisions, counseling sessions, and long conversations about what our future should look like. The divorce papers remained on the table, not as a threat, but as a reminder that words and actions have consequences. Emily understood that apologies alone could never restore the trust we had lost. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly through consistent honesty and accountability. I also learned that protecting a relationship doesn't mean ignoring problems until they become impossible to hide. Whether we eventually stayed together or respectfully separated, we agreed on one thing. Neither of us wanted to repeat the same mistakes. For the first time in years, we were dealing with reality instead of pretending everything was okay. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Looking back, Emily's message, "I'm in Paris. I'll be back in a week," wasn't the moment our marriage ended. It was simply the moment the truth could no longer be avoided. My reply about the divorce papers wasn't written out of anger. It came after months of quiet reflection, unanswered questions, and growing emotional distance. Ignoring her calls wasn't about punishment. It was about refusing to continue the same cycle of excuses and temporary promises. Ironically, the conversation that mattered most wasn't with Emily at first. It was with Linda, whose willingness to listen reminded me that understanding begins with honesty. That experience taught me that lasting relationships are built on respect, communication, and trust. When those foundations begin to crack, the solution isn't more secrets. It's the courage to face difficult conversations before they become impossible to avoid. Sometimes the hardest truth is also the only path toward a better future.